All right, welcome everyone to this Zojo Talk podcast. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Zojo developer evangelist. And this week, our guest is Kevin Cully, a longtime Zojo developer. Hello, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you for being on Zojo Talk. I don't want to say this week or this month because they're not quite that rigid of a schedule, but this time, I'll say this time. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, thank you for having me.
So Kevin has been using Zojo for really long time. I've known him for many years. I don't even know how long. It's like infinity, Kevin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to start using Zojo and what you use it for?
Well, a friend of myself, we were members of a programming group, and we were kind of always on the lookout for the next thing. And we would always pass it back and forth and say, hey, did you look at this development language or did you look at this environment? And he actually found Real Basic and sent it over to me. And it was right about the time where Real Software was announcing that a Linux version was coming out. And I've always been intrigued by Linux. And, I was a casual user, although I wasn't making a living developing software on Linux or consulting with Linux. I was a user of Linux. And so, I looked at the feature set of Real Basic, and it complemented kind of the mindset and the development tools I'd been using. And so once the Linux version came out, then that's really kind of when I downloaded the trial and took a first spin and liked it. And I've been doing Real Basic and Real Studio and now Zojo ever since.
And what tool were you using before you primarily switched to Zojo at this point?
I was a big Microsoft Visual FoxPro developer. Had been for years and years and years. Started out and, when I was a kid, the PC world was just taking off, and I first learned BASIC, kind of taught myself BASIC as a kid.
Right.
And then kind of took every computer class in high school and learned Pascal and had a couple jobs at Pascal, learned Lisp, and had a job with Lockheed Martin doing Lisp. And but then left there, and a friend of mine said, well, maybe we should have rewritten our software in FoxPro, and it kind of stuck with me. And I had an opportunity to get a job using FoxPro and learn it kind of on the fly. And so started with FoxPro for DOS and FoxPro for Windows. I actually did FoxPro for Mac, and made my income for a long time there. And I find that Zojo and Visual FoxPro they're kind of cousin languages or sister languages. They're so similar in concept, and it's just kind of natural for a FoxPro developer like myself to kind of come over to Zojo.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I've actually, when I was doing consulting, I had several projects I'd take on where I was migrating a FoxPro project into Real Studio at the time. I think you're the first person I've ever known to say that they used Lisp in a real job where they got paid. I always thought that was like a college type thing that never left there.
I got hired on at Lockheed right before they actually merged with Lockheed Martin or Martin Marietta and became Lockheed Martin. I got hired on to do an R&D or to kind of pick up an expert system that was written in Lisp. The project was called Think for Three-Dimensional Intelligent Numerical Control. And the expert system negotiated between 5 other systems to decide how to cut airplane parts and molds. And like I said, it was all R&D. So at the time, Lockheed was creating the F-22 fighter. And so they picked the most difficult part on the F-22 fighter were the air intake systems on the front of the plane. And we said if we could cut those parts, or actually those molds, then we could do any part whatsoever. So I worked on that Lisp-based system for quite a while. Unfortunately, peace was breaking out, and that's when the Soviet Union kind of fallen and kind of held, and so there were going to be military cutbacks. And I'm kind of looking around on the floor, and I'm been there for about a year, and all my colleagues had been there for 15 years, 20 years, and so the writing's on the wall. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be shown the door, and so that's why I left to do something else. But it was really exciting. Working on the F-22 and working on these numerical control systems. Just to describe it, what it is you feed like a CAD design of a part into my system, and my system looks at the the design of the part and decides how to cut it out of raw material. And so my program writes other programs that uses the robotic arms and cutters to cut the parts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the first time I saw the program run up on the shop floor, the cutter made a couple passes, and then it came time to change the cutting tool, and the robotic arms decided to go straight through the material that was cutting. It took the shortest path back to the base. So
yeah,
ruined the part.
no longer useful with a big slice through it. Yeah, when I was in college, I interned at Bath Iron Works, which is here in Maine, and they build Navy destroyers. And so for a couple of years, I did that in the summer. And but I didn't do anything quite so cool. I just worked on a database app that tracked. They were still doing a lot of stuff by paper back then.
Right.
So I was on the department that did, they call it the piping, I believe. And we had these big, giant, they look like, I seem to recall they were hand-drawn, and we had to track all this stuff. And I helped build the DOS database software that did that in some tool. And that ended up helping me get my first job out of college, which was kind of cool because that product I used, what the heck was that called? It's Revelation, Advanced Revelation. That's
right. Yeah. I remember Revelation.
Yeah. It was big in the late '80s, early '90s, and that I got my first job doing that, and then moved on from that. But and that used a basic type language as well. It was kind of an integrated database. It was more of a database that you could program rather than a programming system that had a database. But
right.
All right, and nowadays you're primarily a Linux guy, right?
Yeah, I like to think that I'm still a Linux guy. I'm just being more productive with Linux. It's really, it's really come a long way. Since when I started, and it was, always had trouble with hardware and this and that. Now I find it's, it has better hardware support than Windows does. Certainly installing printers.
Really? Yeah. I mean, I've talked about this at the XDC conference last year with you and many others, other Linux lovers. And, I'm looking here now in my virtual machine library with VMware Fusion, and I'm not going to try and count them, but I would guess I have at least 20 Linux VMs set up that I'm just realizing that I haven't looked at them in a while, and I probably need to fire them up and probably run through some updates and stuff. Like with any operating system, those things tend to accrue.
Yeah, definitely so. Linux more than the others, because the update manager on Linux not only is updating the Linux core and your desktop environment and so on, similar to what you would think with Windows and maybe Mac, but Linux also updates all the software that has in its repositories. So you do get a lot of updates, but that's also what helps keep it a little bit more secure, is that your software, in addition to your operating systems, maintained, as opposed to, relying on the tool to kind of push out updates.
Right. Yeah, I definitely noticed that. I mean, I primarily use Mint Linux for working with Zojo and testing and stuff like that. And that, I fire that up regularly, probably at least every other day. And it seems like I often have updates on that. And that's one I use often, use regularly. And,
right.
And now I'm getting a little nervous of when I want to fire up some of these older ones. I'm going to have like 8,000 updates I'm going to need to run.
Yeah, and that might be true. And again, it's a little off-putting, people coming from Windows or Mac, and you're just like, why are there so many updates? And what it truly is you are updating the software that's installed, and the Linux core does not get updated hardly at all. And even the desktop environments rarely get updated per distribution. It's, it's the browsers or LibreOffice or rsync or some software that you have installed that's not really part of the operating system.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I definitely noticed a lot of browser type updates that will be posted.
Well, there's been a lot lately, partly because of the exploits in Flash and Flash-related media. So, for instance, like Chrome has its own Flash plugin built into Chrome. So you're going to get the Chrome, with a Flash patch, then you get a Chrome patch because it's kind of separate. It's a separate patch.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, on my Mac laptop, my MacBook Air, I don't have Flash separately installed. I only have it as part of Chrome. And if I need something that needs Flash, I just fire up Chrome.
Right. Yeah. And, we're living in exciting times in that, YouTube just announced that their default video player is HTML5 based now.
I saw that.
Is the fallback. Netflix is going with the HTML5 player. So,
they used to use Silverlight.
That's right, and they're getting away from that. Microsoft hasn't made an official announcement about discontinuing or killing off Silverlight, but the writing's on the wall. They just haven't maintained it, and they haven't updated.
Yeah, well, I mean, other than Netflix, I was not aware of anything that really used it. That's the only reason you ever had to have it installed was if you wanted to run Netflix.
Well, yeah. Kind of a funny, sad story is, Microsoft's kind of discontinued the enhancements to Visual Fox Pro, and I know a developer that moved from Visual Fox Pro to Silverlight development, and then of course, Microsoft's basically left Silverlight undeveloped. So now he's rewriting software again. So it's a funny, sad story.
While we're talking here, I have my Mint VM that's still open in the background, and the little icon on the tray just changed to say there are now 14 recommended updates.
Okay, yeah.
And I had this thing running on Wednesday, so
right. And I imagine, when we say an update, I imagine if you ran that, you'd probably be done within 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, like you were mentioning, there's an update for Flash, there's an update for Firefox,
right?
Update for Chrome.
Firefox has the plugin for Flash.
Yeah, an update for something called Cairo 2D Vector Library. Update for something called Jasper that's related to JPEG.
Oh, I don't know that one.
And there's a VirtualBox update, which is funny because I didn't think I had VirtualBox in the VM. That probably wouldn't work very well.
Yeah, VirtualBox is great because it's simple and easy to get started with. For people that are just getting started with virtual machines and don't need the bells and whistles,
right?
But here's kind of tying it back to Zojo. I've written a simple benchmarking program in Zojo, because I want to test, the different releases and speed, but I also wanted to test different Linux distributions and be able to compare them against Windows and Mac, same code base, which of course Zojo allows. And I ran that benchmark program, same Linux distributions, comparing VirtualBox to VMware, and the performance of VMware, or the Zojo application in VMware, was greater than the performance of the same Linux distribution, same benchmarking program in VirtualBox. So I thought that was interesting, and it was significant too. It was
right, yeah,
maybe a 20% performance boost.
Yeah, so you're also testing the VM solutions as well, so how efficient they are. Yeah, I primarily use VMware Fusion at this point. At the conference last year when I did a Windows and Linux session, I did use VirtualBox. I put it on the laptop more as a test because, it's free, and I figured, I'll show the free one in case people want to grab it real quick. And it worked well enough. It did seem a little slower. The big issue I had with it was a little harder to configure the networking the way that I wanted so that it would work with the Zojo remote debugger. Mostly just because the configuration windows I wasn't that familiar with in VirtualBox. But once I kind of ended up going to VMware Fusion, looking how stuff was set up there, and then figured out how to replicate it in VirtualBox. But once I did that, everything worked fine.
Right. Yeah.
So which Linux distribution would you say you use primarily at this point?
I'm primarily using Linux Mint 17 with the Cinnamon desktop.
Okay, yeah, that's the one I am running the most as well.
Yeah, coming up on a year ago, after XDC in Las Vegas, you and I were talking about Linux distributions and performance, and I kind of came back and did all sorts of benchmarking across Linux distributions running Zojo applications, and Linux Mint was far better performance than the Ubuntu with the Unity interface, and so I took Linux Mint and tested different desktop environments, and Cinnamon is one of the kind of preferred, most updated desktop environments. It wasn't necessarily the absolute fastest, but is kind of one that's kind of gives
the
you
nicest.
Balance of,
I find it the nicest. The same thing. I tried all of them, and I think the one that starts with an X I thought was pretty speedy, but I didn't.
Yeah, the XFCE.
Yeah,
which is that is the best performer, but it's also it's also kind of getting a little bit older, and it's not being, the kind of development teams kind of drifted off a little bit. But man, it just performs. Now the Linux Mate crew, which is forked the GNOME 2 environment, they're really doing some great things with GNOME 2, and it performs well, but about on par with the Cinnamon desktop, and so I decided to go with Cinnamon.
Now, do you have a laptop that you have that runs Linux full time, or you use a desktop? How do you have that configured?
Yeah. I'm running a Linux laptop. It's a Samsung kind of Air, MacBook Air.
Yeah, look-alike, kind of right?
Yeah, it's just really thin and lightweight, and it's performed well. I've had this for coming up on 3 years now, I think. It's the one thing that's kind of showing its age is the hard drive, and I would love to plunk down some cash and put in an SSD drive in there.
Oh gosh, yeah, you got to do that. That's like a whole new computer.
Yeah, and the prices are really coming down.
I know. I saw that at the holidays this year. The price, because I got about a year ago, I got a 240 gig SSD that I use as my boot drive on my Mac Pro, and I think it was like 50 cents a gig, so it was like half the price. It was probably like $120, $130 for that, and now they're down, I think, to like $100 now for a 240 gig one, but the bigger ones are getting even cheaper, which is appealing.
Yeah, I saw yesterday. The price bounced back up, but the Kingston SSD drive that was just shy of half a, it was 450 gig. I
they're usually like 450 or 480. Yeah.
Yeah, was just under $200. It was like $180. on sale.
Right.
And,
yeah. So it's less than half, less than 50 cents a gigabyte at this point.
Yeah. And, that's a good brand too, the Kingston brand. So, maybe the only brand that might be better is Crucial, but
yeah, I have a Crucial drive, and I've got an older. I know you're not a Mac guy, but I got an older OWC, the Mac sales guys. I had that is now I actually use that now for VMs. So the VMs that I use the most, I throw onto that older, smaller SSD, and those things scream. I mean, they boot up really wicked fast, updates and everything runs quickly. And I can fit 3, so I usually can have a Windows 1, I'll have a Linux 1, and then I'll have a older version of OS 10 sitting there for testing something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I keep looking at new laptops, and it's not economically feasible when you could compare that to throwing in a $200 half or 500 gig hard drive or like a $400 terabyte drive,
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, because the CPU speed hasn't increased a lot in hardware dramatically in the last few years. And, for people like us that are software developers, I mean, we're not really pushing the CPU power of the computer. I mean, we're not encoding video all that often or doing other things that you really need the CPU power. So, I mean, I've got a 2009 Mac Pro that still runs like a champ. It's got lots of cores to work with, it's got lots of drives that are all wicked fast, and it's when the last time I had a laptop that was harder to update, it got old quickly. But throwing in the SSDs in this thing, run like a champ.
Yeah, I think to make it worth it to buy a new laptop, I think I'm going to have to spend about $1,500, between $1,500 and $2,000. And you compare that to, I could get a 1 terabyte drive for $450 or somewhere in that ballpark.
Right. Yeah, that does make it harder with a laptop though, because you don't have the space to put in, more smaller, cheaper ones. You got to get
Yeah. I'm kind of committed, especially with the small form factor of the laptop. I'm committing to removing the existing hard drive and putting in an SSD drive. Because this only has 1 bay in it.
That was a sticking point. I do have a MacBook Air as well. It's my, remote computer, but not my primary one. And, even though I don't use that much, I've already updated that once over the timeline that I've had this tower. And I bet I'll need to update the laptop again before the tower needs updating.
Yeah, I used to alternate, desktop, then laptop, as far as purchasing new hardware. And I was a big proponent of that for several years. But then, just laptops are more compelling now, And, you got the i7 CPUs in there, and and they handle the virtualization so well.
Well, for years, I mean, you hear about people, arguing about this online too. Is that what does it make sense to have? 2 computers or just a single laptop that you use for everything? And for many years, I just had a single laptop I used for everything, but I really didn't like it because I found that once I had everything plugged in, I was really reluctant to unhook everything just so I could grab it and go. You may have had a bunch of stuff open. It might have been connected to external drives. You had to figure out how to close all that. And if you had to leave in a hurry, that it wasn't practical at all. And I found, at least back then, that, I didn't like that you just couldn't update it well. So the next one I got after that, I said, I'm going back to a tower. And I got this tower, and I ended up getting a companion Air to go with it because those were relatively inexpensive for, Mac equipment. And
right.
And I've been using the 2 now for, I don't know, it must be going on 4 years. And I love having 2 at this point. Because if I need to run out for any reason, my Air will be sitting next to me. It'll be charged. I just grab it. I don't have to unhook anything or do anything on the desktop. I just grab the Air. I use Dropbox for any files that I need to find on both. So wherever I end up, I just open up the Air and it'll sync up if it hasn't already synced, and I can just start doing what I need to do on that. So yeah, I find that workflow has been working great for me.
Well, it's important to have redundancy as well, especially if you're consulting and people are paying you to solve a business problem. And if you have one machine, and and something bad happens.
Oh, yeah.
You need that fallback position, and so. Yeah,
that happened to me when I had the laptop. That's a perfect example, Kevin, is I had the display on my MacBook Pro fail. And I had to take it to the Apple store. And they're like, oh, yeah, we extended the warranty on these. It's covered. But, we need to ship it off. It'll be gone in like a week and a half. And I'm like, no. And I had cloned the drive before I brought it in, of course. But I had an old Mac Mini lying around here, and I had to, hook the external drive up to the Mac Mini, boot off of that, run with a monitor I had somewhere, and that was an awful 2 weeks.
Yeah, I've heard of horror stories of people sending either their Macs off to the Apple store, or their PC or laptop off to Dell or somebody, and they get it back and the hard drive's wiped.
Yeah, exactly.
And but yeah, as a developer, is like I need to be able to be productive every day, and so it's important to kind of have that fallback hardware, and of course backups and source code control, and it's backups until you feel reasonably comfortable that you're covered.
Yeah, backups for sure. Yeah, I've got online backups. I use CrashPlan for those, it works great. I love it. Yep. I got Time Machine on the Mac that's backing up everything to another drive. I forget which one I'm using now. It's either the Super Duper or the Carbon Copy Cloner that I'll do probably a clone of important drives like once a month. And then I've got offsite source control. Right now for work stuff, we use Subversion, and for my own stuff, I have it in Git at Bitbucket. And if I came in tomorrow and all my hard drives were melted, I'd be upset, but I'd be able to recover everything in a hopefully relatively short period of time.
Right. Yeah, and that that's important as a paid professional to and different people have different levels of comfort on how many backups and basically their disaster recovery plan.
Yeah. It's just, I just hate it when, a friend or a neighbor calls me up and says, this isn't working, or I lost this. Like, okay, well, did you get this backed up anywhere? What? No. And then, the worst is when I set them up with at least with the Macs, you can use Time Machine, which is pretty easy and automatic. You just plug a drive in, and then the computer, it runs once an hour and backs up any files that have changed. So you don't really have to remember or do anything. And I'll get neighbors set up, say, hey, go to Best Buy, buy a USB hard drive, just plug it in, set it up, Time Machine, don't worry about it. Well, they turn the thing off and leave it off for months.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, that's not doing you any good.
Well, my recent push is when I'm talking to businesses, and I deal with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and with them, I kind of try and educate them and basically say that if a computer is infected, that no matter how well you think that you've cleaned it, you can't fully trust that machine again.
Right.
That you have to kind of think that it's your policy that that machine needs to be wiped. You probably need to flash the BIOS and then reinstall, from scratch. And for Windows, that is a horrifying, that is a high hurdle to leap. Because you could take days just installing software and re-authenticating and licenses. That's the beautiful thing about Linux is, really within 20 minutes, you could have the operating system installed and the bulk of the software restored. And then, you restore a lot of your files. Yeah, after scanning them, of course. But then, you're back, 90% back up and running within an hour or so.
Right. Well, that brings up a good point. Is that Linux does tend to intimidate a few people, but it is really, really easy to get started. This didn't come up with the podcast today with Mark Zeter, but when I was on vacation in Florida, he had emailed me he was about to put out a new issue of the magazine. He wanted a screen shot of our Eddie's Electronics example running on Linux. And he's like, I know you have all kinds of VMs, Paul. You think you could, do that real quick and get it to me? And I replied, I said, oh, geez, I do have a ton of VMs, but I'm in Florida with my laptop and I don't have any VMs on the laptop. And I said, but I think I could do that. I'll get back to you. And, I downloaded, I still had VMware Fusion on the laptop. So I just, I went to the Mint site, downloaded Mint, installed it, downloaded Zojo, installed it, yep. ran the example, took a screenshot, sent it to him. I mean, it took less than an hour. The longest part was downloading Mint, really.
Right, yeah.
The install was wicked quick. And then I sent it off to him, and it, worked just fine. But, it took no time at all to do all that.
Yeah, I think, it's wonderful that Linux is so popular on servers, and I'd love to see, a greater percentage of Linux desktops in homes and businesses. Not that Linux needs to dominate; it's just we need that third player to kind of give us better security across industries. That we have Windows, Mac, and Linux, and to get back to Zojo, I love that about Zojo is that you can develop across platforms. I'm developing a new piece of software for a veterinary clinic, and I'm developing on Zojo for Linux, and I'm deploying to Zojo for Windows for now, and then later on, he's going to add Linux laptops and cheap ones that his people can kind of carry around his offices and across sites,
right?
Because they kind of rotate through various locations in their cities, kind of more like doctors or tend to do.
Oh yeah,
that they rotate their staff around to various locations, and then they can kind of carry their cheap laptop with them, and then kind of connect to the local, in their case, MySQL database, and run their software and be productive.
Yeah, it's definitely handy. Certainly from my perspective, being a Mac guy, I like being able to use the Macs, but still have been able to, ship software to people that needed Windows apps, and it's just really handy.
Yeah, you were talking about the remote debugger, and I did a blog post a little bit ago, and I called that the Zojo secret weapon, and I was doing some debugging with just some of the key press events in a Windows application using the key down, and something was, I had it working perfectly on Linux, of course, because I'm developing on Linux. And,
right.
I'm like, I tested it out on Windows and it didn't work. And I'm like, there's some variation there, and wasn't quite sure what. And fire up the remote debugger. So I'm remote debugging from my Linux laptop down into a Windows virtual machine, and just connect, figure it out, quick code fix, rebuild, and retest, and then deploy. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely great. Yeah, I always the last couple conferences I think I've done in one of my sessions a demo of the remote debugger at least a couple times, and I'm always surprised how many people haven't used it, just because it is so darn helpful.
Well, I mean, that being said, yeah, a lot of developers are single platform developers.
No, these were people that did multiple platforms and were like, I would just copy the project over and run Zojo over there and test it and then make changes and then copy the project back. And I'm like, oh, no, you don't need to worry about any of that. Just all one place. Just run it.
So what were they doing? Were they doing like system.debug out or something to kind of, kind of putting in their own messaging to figure out what's
No,
what?
It sounded like they would actually just run, copy the project file over to another installation of Zojo on the other machine. And
and run Zojo locally. I see.
Right, and then run it there, and then debug it there, and then note what the fixes are, and either fix it there and then move it over, or make the fix in the other place. I don't know. It was more complicated than it needed to be, and it's probably how you have to do it in a lot of other tools. So maybe that's just what people default to and don't realize that, hey, we got this much simpler way to go about it.
Right. Huh.
So
remote
as
debugging.
remote debugging. Yeah, and I think one of the conferences, I think that was a catchphrase that people would just run around, much like that Lego movie from last year where that little dude kept yelling spaceship. People would run around the conference yelling remote debugger. So I'm looking out my window right now, Kevin, and in case for our listeners, in case you don't know, I'm in the Northeast. I'm in Maine, Northeast United States, and Kevin's in the southern and eastern part, Atlanta area, if I'm right. Is that right, Kevin?
That's correct. I'm in a northern suburb.
Well, I'm looking out the window, and surprise, surprise, it is snowing here. Seems like it's been snowing all week. We've got our fourth largest since they've been keeping records in 1880s. On Tuesday, we got 25 inches of snow, which is the fourth largest storm since they've been keeping the records there. And that's a lot of snow to get all at once. But it's snowing again today, of course. This is a couple days later. And we're supposed to get like another half a foot or so.
And we have barely gotten a flurry down here.
Yeah. And,
much to my chagrin. I really like snow. I miss it.
Well, you were telling me that you like snow so much, and that this is the sort of thing that you say, and then all the people that are in the northern area that are sick of snow at this point will get mad at you for. But you say you like snow so much that you make your own.
That's right. Several years ago, I built a snow gun, a snow machine. Well, I should call it a snow gun. Snow machine means like snowmobile for us Americans, right? Or us lower 48 people. Snow gun, where I was making my own snow using, one is cold temperatures for Georgia, a special nozzle that makes it all happen, and then a air compressor and a pressure washer. And I came to be kind of famous with my neighbors.
I bet.
My neighbors would say, it's like, next time you make snow, let me know the night before, because all my coworkers want to come over and see it. And so they would tell their coworkers, and then they would make a special trip to our neighborhood to see the snow. And it would get out, the word would get out to the police force. And so we would see extra police driving by because they would just radio it around, and people would come see the snow that was in my front yard and nowhere else.
So how much snow, natural snow, would you say you get down in that area in the winter season?
Well, I would say, on average, we probably would get 1 2-inch snow per year. Now, last year we had a couple good snows. This year, nothing. And so, on average, so it's really something to see, man-made snow, which is basically like what they make in, ski resorts.
Right. Yeah. So, you hear about that all the time here, in the mountains. They'll start, firing up the snow guns to make snow in October if it's cold enough in the mountains here.
Right.
And they make a lot, obviously. They fill a whole trail for people to ski down. I'm not a skier myself, but
right. So the technology that I use is kind of a similar technology. It's just slightly lower tech in that I don't have a fan that helps disperse it, and it's on obviously a much smaller scale. And basically, I'm just running water through a garden hose and up into the snow gun, where they're drawing it from ponds and retention, lakes and so on.
I've never really thought about it, actually. It makes me laugh. Our average snowfall here is about 60 inches a year.
So 5 feet of snow.
Yeah, but not all at once. That's from
spread out.
Mid-November to mid-April ish is our snow season, and and it snows and then it melts and then it snows again. I'm in Maine. I'm pretty close to the ocean. I'm probably just a few miles from the ocean. And that helps moderate the temps here. The ocean doesn't freeze. We're not that far north. So, the air off the ocean is, above freezing. So
Right.
depending on the type of storm, it might even rain here more than it snows. But this year has been weird. We got our first snowstorm on Thanksgiving, which is pretty early for us. And we got I think almost a foot on Thanksgiving. But that was all melted by Christmas. But, this year we were in Florida for Christmas, so we didn't see any snow. But I'm told by people that were here that it was warm in Maine around Christmas time. It was in the 50s. And then, of course, the day we flew back, it snowed. And it's been, and that was in early January. And it's been super, super cold ever since then. I think we had one day where it warmed up, it rained, and then it got cold again. And then now we've got dumped on with the snow, the 2 feet of snow earlier this week that actually closed school for 2 days. And then it's snowing here again today, which closed a lot of schools again today. Not my kids this time. But yeah, it's very white out here.
Last year we had a big snowstorm, when I say snow, it's snow/ice here.
Oh, ice is the worst too.
People were taking 8 to 10 hours to get home from work because it kind of caught them off guard. The cold air swept south, kind of caught them by surprise.
So it wasn't predicted. So people
right, it wasn't predicted, and so the news was talking about the people trapped on the roads and so on, and so I got up the next morning, and bundled, loaded up my ATV with gasoline and water and, just some blankets or, a shovel to kind of help people get out. And so I drove my ATV, up to the nearest highway, and I was really disappointed that nobody was stuck. I couldn't help anybody. But, so my intentions were good, but I wasn't actually able to help anybody out. But there, 10 miles away, it was still really bad. But I just couldn't drive that far on my ATV.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's something similar just happened with this big storm here. Kind of the opposite thing is that they predicted a huge blizzard for most of the Northeast, like from Philadelphia up through Maine, and it ended up that the blizzard didn't really hit that far south. So New York was predicted to get a couple feet of snow, and they ended up with, only 9 inches, which is still not insignificant. But Philadelphia was supposed to get a lot, like a foot and a half, and they got 2 inches. So people are all upset. Oh, you predicted this storm. It was all hype. You didn't get any snow. And, but Boston, I think Boston got more snow than we did. And, all of New England just got pounded by this. It ended up the storm was off by 100 miles or something, which made all the difference to New York and Philadelphia. I feel for these weather guys trying to predict snowstorms like this, because snow, I mean, you can just say, it's going to rain, and who cares if it rains or it doesn't rain, or if it rains, a little more than you thought it might or a little less. No one's going to notice. People don't measure the rain. It doesn't affect the roads too much. But having to figure out how much snow is actually going to land on the ground is really hard. Yeah.
Snow, tornadoes, and hurricanes. We'll take all the accuracy we can get out of those.
Yeah.
Weather predictions.
The snow we got on earlier the week was light and fluffy snow, and it was super windy, so it was just blowing all over the place. You couldn't see anything. And
right.
And when I read after the fact, they said they were calculating the snowfall totals based on, they refer to it as a 15-to-1 ratio. That means 15 inches of snow per inch of rain.
Right. Yep.
And the snow we're getting today, I haven't seen what the ratio would be, but it's got to be a lot lower. More typical is 10-to-1. 15-to-1 would mean it's, pretty light and fluffy. And it was really cold. The wind chills were well below zero during this storm. But today it's 30 and snowing, and the snow is sticking to everything. And, this is the worst, much like an ice storm, because if this happens for a while and then the wind picks up, that's what rips trees down and power lines and stuff. And it could be that we're getting, even more precipitation from this storm, but because the snow is heavy and wet, we wouldn't get as much snow out of it. I don't really know, but that just is one of the things that makes it very hard for them to predict this stuff. So I feel for them a little bit.
They're well paid, but and they are getting better at at their models, but there's always a surprise. It's when you think about how thick the Earth's atmosphere is, and it's basically fluid dynamics. That model is just confounding.
Yeah, it's surprising they can predict anything, it seems. I mean, because the storms they predict, the heavy snow we're getting at the moment happens often here because a tiny little storm will just kind of float across the United States and then, boom, hits the ocean. And then some combination of factors cause it to essentially suck up ocean moisture and suck down cold air from Canada and, boom, dump snow. And but just figuring out what all those combinations are, that would probably need not a 4-year-old computer like you and I are running with.
That's right. Yeah, those the weather people, they subscribe to multiple weather models, or at least the Georgia people do, and in their broadcast they'll say it's like, well, this model says this and this model says that, and but the weather person says I'm thinking this is the most accurate model, and they'll kind of demo that. I don't know if they do that up in Maine or other parts in the country. I'm sure that they do, but
they do that here too.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see these different computer models, and they, they'll come up with different predictions, and vastly different predictions.
Right. Well, I mean, like you said, they're essentially trying to simulate the atmosphere, and there's a lot of variables there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank Kevin again. This was Kevin Culley, longtime Zojo developer and user. I want to thank you for being my guest this time on Zojo Talk. It's a blast talking with you.
Yeah, it was great being here. Thanks for having me on.